I'm 75 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen bee.
The private dinner was supposed to restore peace. Instead, one sentence left Queen Camilla motionless, King Charles staring at the table, and Prince William refusing to look away. Behind the locked doors of Balmoral, the future of the monarchy was discussed without cameras, speeches, or public ceremony. But before the evening ended, Camilla heard words that struck at the heart of her royal position, and palace aides have now revealed exactly what was said. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had summoned a restricted family dinner at Balmoral and made clear that only the most senior voices would be present. The gathering included Camilla, William, Anne, Edward, and Sophie, because the dispute had grown too serious for delay. Balmoral was not chosen by accident. It carried the emotional weight of Queen Elizabeth II's private world, and that mattered because the family was no longer arguing only about manners or rank. They were arguing about representation, private estates, and who would shape the late Queen's legacy when the crown moved forward. The crown means the monarchy itself, the authority, continuity, and public role passed from one sovereign to the next. William arrived, knowing the dinner was supposed to settle those tensions quietly. A documented staff account, later leaked through palace aides, confirmed that the prince had no intention of leaving the central issue vague. During the meal, he spoke plainly enough to freeze the room. Camilla may stand beside the king, but she will not decide how Grandmama's memory is represented, and she will not lead this family when the crown passes forward. He did not rush the sentence. He did not soften it. Charles heard every word, and so did everyone else. Camilla stopped lifting her glass and set it down beside her plate. The Queen understood at once that this was not an objection to one event or one opinion. William had drawn a line around her future place in the monarchy. Charles looked toward his wife, yet he did not interrupt, and that silence cut deeper than the declaration itself. She had expected the monarch to close down the challenge. Instead, he let it stand in the air. Anne then strengthened the blow. She said Balmoral belonged emotionally to the family tradition of the late Queen, and must never become a platform for personal influence. Edward quietly agreed, and Sophie, though more restrained, did not rescue the moment or break the growing unity around William. That mattered, because one son's objection could be dismissed as tension. A shared position from William, Anne, Edward, and Sophie could not. Then the evening broke apart. One aide waiting beyond the dining room doors later described hearing a chair scrape sharply across the floor. Moments later, Camilla left the table before dessert, while Charles remained seated under the stunned silence of his children. The sentence had shocked the palace, but not nearly as much as the realization that the king had seemed to know the challenge was coming. To understand why one sentence carried enough force to empty a royal dining room, the people seated around that table, and everything each of them feared losing, must be examined first. This was not simply a disagreement between a stepson and his father's wife. It was a collision between a king trying to protect the woman he loved and an heir determined to protect the institution he would one day inherit. Camilla entered the dinner expecting Charles to stand beside her. William entered believing silence had already lasted too long. Between them sat a family carrying decades of resentment, loyalty, grief, and unfinished history. Charles believed Camilla had endured years of public rejection and earned security within the royal household. A royal household is the group of staff, advisors, and private offices supporting a senior member of the family. For the king, defending her position also meant defending the choices that had shaped his adult life. If her place remained uncertain, he feared the family was still refusing to accept the life he had built. William carried a different history into Balmoral. The estate held memories of childhood summers, private conversations with Queen Elizabeth II, and the pain surrounding his late mother's place within the family. The prince did not view its customs as harmless routines. He saw them as emotional promises linking the present monarchy to those who had come before. William paused outside the dining room and asked Anne whether she would speak if Charles tried to dismiss the concerns. The princess answered without hesitation. She would not allow sentiment to replace duty. Her support mattered because the future king knew that challenging his father alone could be framed as personal anger. Anne's voice would make the issue harder to reduce to resentment. Camilla had already shared her fears with Sophie. The queen consort said she was exhausted by being treated as temporary, as though her place beside Charles might disappear the moment his reign ended. Sophie listened with sympathy, but warned her that seeking greater influence over family traditions could appear less like service and more like control. The trusted confidant understood both sides, yet her caution only deepened Camilla's sense of isolation. Edward arrived, carrying a handwritten summary of concerns raised by senior household staff. A household summary is a private record collecting complaints or warnings for senior royals to review. It listed cancelled invitations, altered seating plans, and proposals suggesting that Camilla's office should supervise future Balmoral gatherings. Charles had read the concerns before dinner. The king folded the page, placed it inside his jacket, and entered the room, knowing William's frustration was shared by others. His silence was therefore not ignorance, it was hesitation. Yet one older wound carried more weight than every document combined. Months earlier, Camilla had tried to alter a deeply personal Balmoral tradition without consulting William or Anne, and the family had never truly recovered. That forgotten confrontation had become the point of no return, and when the family remembered what happened inside the late Queen's private sitting room, the dinner's explosion no longer seemed sudden. Long before the dinner, a quieter confrontation had already drawn the battle lines. It happened inside a room that had remained almost untouched since Queen Elizabeth II's final summer at Balmoral. There were no raised voices at first, no aides rushing through corridors, only Camilla, a set of proposed alterations, and Princess Anne, standing beside her mother's favorite chair. What followed became the private trigger that William would later carry into the dinner, like a warning that could no longer be ignored. Anne had supervised access to the late Queen's private sitting room since her death. A private sitting room is a personal family space used for rest, reading, and confidential conversation, rather than public ceremony. William was permitted to use it during quiet visits because the room offered him a direct emotional connection to his grandmother. That mattered deeply. Balmoral was not simply property to him, it was memory, grief, and continuity held together by familiar objects. Camilla's office proposed folding the room into a wider program of charitable receptions. The Queen Consort's plan included moving furniture, replacing several personal items, and admitting selected guests during private gatherings. She believed Balmoral had to adapt to Charles's reign. Anne believed adaptation had crossed into intrusion. The confrontation came during a private inspection. Camilla asked staff to move Queen Elizabeth's writing desk from its usual position. Before anyone touched it, Anne stepped forward, placed one hand firmly on the edge, and said, "Nothing in this room moves without the family agreeing." The princess did not shout. Her restraint made the warning sharper. Camilla felt humiliated before the household team. She replied that she was queen and could not be expected to seek permission whenever Balmoral needed to change. Anne answered that the title gave her dignity beside Charles, not ownership over every memory connected to the crown. The queen consort went still. She refused to withdraw the broader proposal, but the wound was immediate. Anne contacted William that same evening through a recorded private call. The prince listened without interruption, then telephoned Charles and demanded that the plan be stopped. The king avoided a direct answer, hoping time would cool the dispute. Instead, the delay convinced his son that silence was being used to protect Camilla from necessary limits. The desk remained untouched, yet William later learned that her office continued drafting plans for greater control over future family events. From that moment, he began preparing to confront the issue before repetition made it permanent. The dinner was never going to be informal. William entered it, determined to force Charles to choose between postponing the conflict again and finally defining Camilla's boundaries. When the first course was cleared, and William pushed his chair back, everyone at the table understood that the confrontation they had avoided for months had finally arrived. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with William setting down his fork and asking his father one carefully measured question: who would control the family traditions of Balmoral when Charles was no longer king? The room changed instantly. Camilla straightened in her chair. Anne stopped speaking. Charles knew the question was not about some distant future. It was an invitation to establish a boundary, and his son had no intention of leaving without one. William explained that Balmoral traditions could not be managed as extensions of Camilla's household. The prince insisted that decisions involving the late queen's private rooms and family gatherings required agreement from the sovereign, the heir, and Anne. The sovereign is the reigning monarch, while the heir is the person next in line to inherit the crown. That structure mattered because Balmoral carried both royal authority and deeply personal family memory. Charles tried to calm the tension. The king said his wife had only attempted to modernize the estate and make it useful for a new reign. William answered that modernization without consent was simply another name for removing the family's voice. His tone remained controlled, but the warning was unmistakable. Camilla leaned across the table and asked whether he believed she would ever truly be accepted as part of the family. William looked directly at the queen consort and replied that acceptance was not the same as authority. She accused him of punishing her for the past and hiding behind Queen Elizabeth's memory. The prince's expression hardened. Protecting a boundary, he said, was not revenge. Charles finally told his son he had gone too far. William did not retreat. He delivered the sentence later preserved in a documented staff account and leaked by palace aides. Camilla could stand beside the king, but she would not control Elizabeth's legacy or lead the family under a future reign. Anne placed her napkin beside her plate and said William had expressed a concern she shared. The princess believed the late queen's private arrangements should remain protected from one household's control. Edward then confirmed that he also opposed placing Balmoral's family traditions under Camilla's office. Charles turned toward Sophie, hoping she might soften the growing opposition. The trusted confidant chose her words carefully. She said Camilla deserved respect, but Queen Elizabeth's arrangements deserved protection. The king then understood the full danger. The table had united around the very boundary he had spent months avoiding. Camilla's humiliation was immediate. Yet Charles carried one final revelation. He admitted that he had already authorized a confidential review of her office's authority at Balmoral. A confidential review is a private investigation used to examine whether staff have exceeded their proper role. The argument had sounded personal, but the review hidden inside Charles's jacket proved that forces far beyond William were already deciding how much power Camilla would be allowed to keep. As Camilla stared at the king, Charles removed the folded pages he had carried into the room. The document was not a love letter, an apology, or a defense. It was a private review of her Balmoral authority, prepared after senior aides warned that separate royal households were issuing conflicting instructions. In that moment, the dinner ceased to be a family argument. It became a reckoning over who actually held power and whether Charles could still protect his wife from its consequences. The review had been commissioned after staff received competing directions from the King's office, Camilla's team, William's representatives, and Anne. A royal household is the private staff and advisors who manage a senior royal's duties, correspondence, and events. At Balmoral, those offices had begun arguing over access to private rooms, invitations, and family schedules. That mattered because confusion at the estate was no longer administrative. It showed that authority itself had become divided. Charles turned to the central recommendation and read it aloud. Camilla could host engagements beside him, but decisions involving Queen Elizabeth's personal legacy, succession-related gatherings, and hereditary family traditions would require joint approval from the sovereign and the direct heir. Succession-related gatherings are private meetings connected to the future transfer of royal responsibility. The wording was precise, and its meaning was brutal. Her influence would stop where the next reign began. Charles removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes. The king looked exhausted rather than angry. Camilla asked why he had hidden the review from her. He answered that every attempt to discuss her office had become a defense of their marriage instead of an honest examination of how her team was operating. William's expression softened briefly. The prince told his father that no one was asking him to reject his wife. They were asking him to separate private devotion from constitutional and family responsibility. Charles heard the distinction, but Camilla heard another limit. Then the most damaging line emerged. The review recorded that one member of her staff had described the Queen Consort as the future, central guardian of Balmoral continuity. Neither Charles nor William had approved that title. Camilla denied authorizing it, yet she admitted encouraging her team to prevent her position from being reduced after the king's reign. The admission changed everything. The conflict no longer belonged to one room, one desk, or one dinner. It had reached into the future. Charles now faced the choice he had delayed for months. He could suspend the review and protect Camilla in the moment, or accept its recommendation and risk wounding her before the entire family. The king's next movement was almost silent, but when he reached for a pen and turned the final page toward himself, Camilla understood that the evening was about to become irreversible. Charles did not make a speech. He did not ask William to leave, and he did not order Anne to withdraw her support. Instead, the king signed the recommendation limiting Camilla's Balmoral authority. The sound of the pen against the page was barely audible, yet it carried more weight than every raised voice that had come before it. Camilla watched his hand stop, stared at his signature, and realized the man who had defended her for decades had chosen the crown. Charles approved the recommendation, placing Queen Elizabeth II's private Balmoral traditions under the joint oversight of himself, William, and Anne. Joint oversight means that major decisions must be agreed by several authorized people, rather than made by one office alone. Camilla's team could still support public engagements, but it would no longer issue independent instructions involving the late Queen's rooms, family gatherings, or inherited customs. The decision mattered because it ended the uncertainty that had divided staff. It also placed a visible limit on the Queen Consort's influence. The king then asked Edward to supervise a temporary household review. A household review is a formal check of how royal staff receive instructions and which office has final responsibility. Edward would ensure that future orders came through one agreed channel instead of several competing teams. He accepted quietly, understanding that the family's private conflict had already begun damaging daily operations. Camilla looked directly at Charles. "You signed it while I was sitting here?" she asked. The monarch replied that another delay would only deepen the damage. She slowly pushed her chair away from the table. He reached toward her, but she moved her hand before he could touch it. Her anger had become something heavier. The signature proved that his defense of her had limits. William stood as the Queen Consort prepared to leave. The prince said he had never wanted to humiliate her. Camilla answered that humiliation was exactly what the family had achieved, whether they intended it or not. She did not wait for reassurance. She no longer trusted reassurance. After she left, Charles revealed that the restriction would be announced internally the following morning. No public explanation was planned, yet too many aides already knew the dinner had ended in rupture. Silence could contain the details, but it could not erase what staff had witnessed. Camilla paused outside the dining room and asked an aide to prepare her private car. The official later documented seeing tears in her eyes before she turned toward the staircase. Yet she did not leave Balmoral. Hours later, the Queen Consort sent William a private request. She wanted to meet him alone without Charles, Anne, advisors, or staff. With the institution removed from the room, and no one left to speak on their behalf, William and Camilla were finally forced to confront the wound beneath the struggle for power. Near midnight, William entered a small Balmoral drawing room and found Camilla standing alone beside an unlit fireplace. There were no advisors waiting, no papers on the table, and no king to interrupt them. For the first time that evening, neither could hide behind titles or procedure. She asked him one question: whether he truly believed she had spent years trying to erase his grandmother. His answer would determine whether the dinner became a permanent family fracture or the beginning of an uneasy peace. Camilla spoke without the confidence she had shown at dinner. The Queen Consort admitted that her efforts at Balmoral had been driven by fear. A drawing room is a private reception space used for quiet conversation away from formal events. In that room, she confessed that after Charles's reign, every role she had built might disappear, leaving her remembered only through old controversy rather than years of service. William listened, then admitted his own fear. The prince had viewed every proposed change as a threat to the memories connecting him with Queen Elizabeth and Princess Diana. He worried that familiar traditions would be softened, moved, or replaced before he could protect them. That mattered because Balmoral was not merely an estate to him. It held the emotional history of two women whose absence still shaped his life. Camilla sat down and removed a ring from her finger, turning it slowly in her palm. She said she had never wanted the late Queen's desk removed permanently. The Queen only wanted proof that she was allowed to shape something inside Balmoral, rather than remain a guest in the place her husband now led. William answered carefully. Her desire to belong was not the problem. The danger came from trying to create belonging through authority, forcing the family to defend memories that should never have felt threatened. The future king told her that acceptance could not be built by making others surrender control. Camilla's voice broke. She admitted that she had pushed too hard and asked whether he would ever see her as more than the woman who had complicated his childhood. William did not offer easy forgiveness. Instead, he offered something clearer. Under his future reign, she would retain dignity, protection, and a respected place, provided she never attempted to govern the family through Charles. Camilla accepted the Balmoral restriction and promised to instruct her staff not to challenge it. Then she made her first voluntary concession. Queen Elizabeth's sitting room would remain unchanged. Their understanding was fragile, but real. It might have remained private had one sentence from dinner not already escaped the castle. The family had reached a fragile peace in private, but outside the castle gates, one leaked sentence was about to become a national judgment on Camilla's place within the monarchy. By sunrise, the private dinner was no longer private. Aides had repeated William's sentence, and the words spread through newsrooms before the palace could prepare a response. Supporters saw an heir defending Queen Elizabeth's memory. Critics saw a woman publicly diminished by the family she had spent years trying to serve. The debate exploded, because the leak was not merely about Camilla's authority. It reopened every unresolved question about loyalty, legitimacy, forgiveness, and who truly belonged at the monarchy's center. Palace communications staff quickly learned that two separate aides had confirmed the essential details: William's declaration, Anne's support, Charles's silence, and Camilla's sudden departure from the table. A palace communications team is the group responsible for official statements and managing public reaction. Their first response was deliberately restrained. They said private family discussions at Balmoral would remain confidential, but the refusal to deny the sentence only convinced the public that the confrontation had happened exactly as described. A major morning newspaper then carried a front page showing Camilla entering a royal car beneath the headline, "Beside the King, but not beyond him." Copies were held against the railings outside Buckingham Palace, while broadcasters debated the meaning of the words. The headline mattered because it reduced the entire crisis to one painful boundary. Her position beside Charles did not automatically extend into the next reign. Outside the palace gates, a crowd began to gather. One woman placed a small photograph of Queen Elizabeth beside a handwritten card reading, "Her rooms, her memory, her family." The gesture became a symbol of public support for William. Yet other voices pushed back. Commentators argued that Camilla had been accepted as queen consort, but was still being punished for a history she could never change. Her supporters called the dinner a calculated humiliation. Charles watched the coverage from Balmoral and muted the television when the headline appeared. The king told Edward that protecting the monarchy had once again required hurting someone he loved. Edward listened, but reminded him that delaying the truth had caused the wound to deepen. The monarch did not answer. Camilla then surprised her own staff. The queen consort refused to demand a denial and ordered them not to attack William. She accepted the new Balmoral arrangement and insisted that no statement turn the dispute into open war. That choice changed the meaning of the leak. She had lost the battle over authority, but she still controlled how she responded. When the family gathered one last time before leaving Balmoral, The question was no longer who had won it, was whether Camilla could turn public defeat into a final act of dignity. The final meeting lasted less than 20 minutes, but it gave the Balmoral crisis its lasting meaning. Camilla entered without advisors and took the same seat she had abandoned the previous evening. Charles watched her carefully. William remained standing until she spoke. There would be no attempt to reverse the restriction, no demand for an apology, and no further battle over the late Queen's rooms. Instead, Camilla made a choice that ended the conflict and defined the limits of her place within the royal family. Camilla confirmed that her office would no longer seek control over Queen Elizabeth's private rooms, hereditary family traditions, or gatherings involving the monarchy's future direction. Hereditary traditions are private customs passed through generations of the royal family, rather than created by one reigning household. The Queen Consort's decision mattered because it removed the fear that temporary influence could slowly become permanent authority. Charles formally approved the new arrangement. The king confirmed that these matters would remain under the joint stewardship of the sovereign, the direct heir, and Anne. Joint stewardship means shared responsibility, requiring agreement from each named royal. Edward would supervise the household structure and ensure that staff received instructions through one clear channel. The confusion that had fueled the crisis was finally over. Camilla then turned toward Anne. She asked that the late Queen's writing desk remain exactly where it had always stood. The princess gave one brief nod. No speech followed. None was needed. The simple exchange ended the dispute that had first divided them inside Elizabeth's private sitting room. William thanked Camilla for accepting the boundary. The prince did not retract what he had said at dinner, because he still believed the warning was necessary. But he admitted that delivering it before the entire family had caused genuine pain. The Queen Consort accepted the acknowledgement without asking him to pretend the conflict had been meaningless. Charles reached for his wife's hand when the discussion ended. This time, she allowed him to hold it. Camilla finally recognized that his signature had not rejected their marriage. The monarch had separated devotion as a husband from responsibility as king, and that distinction had protected both the crown and their relationship. Camilla retained her public dignity, charitable work, and place beside Charles. Yet the dinner permanently ended any expectation that she would control the monarchy's private direction or independently shape Queen Elizabeth's legacy. William emerged as an heir willing to establish painful limits. Anne proved that loyalty did not require silence. The Queen discovered that acceptance could not be secured through authority, but dignity could survive through restraint. The Balmoral dinner did not destroy the family. It forced everyone at the table to recognize the difference between love, title, memory, and power. And when the doors of Balmoral closed behind them, the verdict was complete. Camilla had not been removed from the royal family, but the family had finally defined the boundary she would never cross again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.